have a specific value?
Yes.
It does. Okay, 3 minus 1 is 2. The n on the right-hand side is my target column, okay, the column that I'm setting up right now, which is column F. So that means column F now has a value of 2. Are we doing okay so far with these concepts? We're not quite done yet. Once we set up the columns, we can go into the subroutine. The subroutine will start execution again from line 3, which is the first line that has any action. Line 3, once again, will try to evaluate the condition, which is n less than or equal to 1. In this case, n is 2. 2 is less than or equal to 1 is once again false. So that means we have to go to line 6 again, because line 6 is the else branch. And once again, we have to do exactly the same thing. Okay, what I'll do is I'm going to split the screen horizontally. So this time I can scroll one part without scrolling the other side. It's still kind of confusing because I don't have enough space to look at everything at the same time. On line 6, we have the same thing again. We have to resolve the invocation before we can actually perform the return statement. So we're going to do the same thing. We will have to invoke factorial again. Whenever you invoke factorial, you have to specify the return info as well as n. Okay, n is the parameter. Return info, once again, is specifying, okay, when I'm all done, we have to go back to line 6. But line 6 will look like this when I come back. The question mark will be resolved, and I just have to perform the multiplication and perform the return statement, and I'm done when I return. N, once again, relies on the current n. The current n, which is in column F, has a value of 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. So the new column, or column H, will have a value of 1. Are we doing okay so far with the 3 levels of invocations? Now, it is important to remember return info, return line number, parameters, and local variables. They are all allocated on a per invocation basis, not allocated on a per subroutine basis. That's why when we are using recursion, every invocation, even though there's only one single subroutine, every invocation has its own version of return info and its own n. Okay, now this is something that is kind of important, down the line. It is on a per invocation basis. Now that we have set up all the columns, we go back to the beginning of the subroutine, which is on line 3 again. And it is once again checking n, is it less than or equal to 1? The answer is, aha, this time it is. Because n has a value of 1, 1 is less than or equal to 1. Then we can go to line 4. Line 4 is easy. So it seems, because it is saying we just returned a value of 1. Now here comes the confusing part. Because return info itself has a return statement, and yet we are executing a return statement. Don't let that bother you, okay? Do not let it distract what a return statement is supposed to do. What is a return statement supposed to do?
End of the subroutine.
It replaces the question mark with whatever value that you're returning, right? That's the only thing it's supposed to do. It does not care how messy this line looks like, okay? So in this case, what we are doing is we are taking this cell, copy and paste it, just like before. This mechanism has not changed. And then we take a look and say, oh, this is the part, this is the placeholder. I will replace the placeholder with the value that I'm returning. Now this is the most important part of this entire algorithm, okay? In other words, the return info can be specifying a return statement and even on the same line. I don't care what it is, because all I'm trying to do when I execute a return statement is to look for the question mark and replace that question mark with whatever value I'm returning here, which is a constant of 1 in this case. I don't care whether the statement that contains the question mark is an assignment statement, is it at the beginning of a conditional statement, is it the beginning of a loop, is it a part of a huge calculation? I don't care. I really do not. because I just care about where's the question mark, I'm just replacing that with the value that I'm returning. Okay? So don't let the statement of return info distract you from what you're supposed to do when you're executing a return statement. Are we doing okay so far? Okay, we can kind of come back and look at it again later on. After line 4, we get out of the conditional statement and we get to line 8 right away. Line 8 is the end of a subroutine, which means we're going to deallocate both of these columns, and then we continue execution on line 6. Why? Because return info tells me to. Okay? Now, but the important part is line 6 is no longer looking like this because the invocation is now resolved. I know it is a value of 1. So that means when I get back to line 6, I don't look at column G and column H anymore because those two columns at this point are deallocated. My N is now on column F, which has a value of 2. The return statement, okay, let me just see if I can slide this over just enough to see also that. Okay, that's just enough. Line 6 now looks like this. Return N times 1. The N that we are talking about is column F, which has a value of 2. Do we know how to calculate 2 times 1? Sure, 2 times 1 specifies 2. So now that we are executing line 6, we are actually executing return 2. What do we do when we say return 2? We look up the return info cell, whatever it is, we look for the question mark and replace it with the value that we are returning. We are returning a value of 2, and that's exactly what we'll do. We will copy and paste this cell, and then we replace the question mark with a value of 2, because N is 2, 2 times 1 is 2. Are we doing okay so far? Because I know this is confusing.
So basically it was deallocated, but you haven't really done, it was deallocated first before you actually did the execution of the multiplication.
Okay, what row 12 of the trace is doing is to figure out what the question mark is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But it does not execute line 6. Line 6 is quote-unquote dormant at that point. All I'm doing on row 12 of the trace is to resolve what that question mark is. But what I'm going to do with that question mark, I don't care, because my job on row 12 of the trace is simply to figure out what I'm supposed to replace with a value of 1. And then we get to line 8, which is the end of the last invocation, the third invocation of factorial. And then we have to go back to line 6 because return info tells me that I'm supposed to go back to line 6, right? So that's why on row 14 of the trace, I'm back on line 6. And I'm going to execute line 6. Now when I execute line 6 does not look like this anymore because the invocation is already resolved. It is resolved by row 12 of the trace. So that's why when I execute line 6 on row 14 of the trace, we are actually executing return N times 1. Okay? We are executing return N times 1, N being 2, so that means we're returning 2 on line 6. When we're returning 2 on line 6, what do we do? With any return statement, all we do is to copy and paste the return info cell and replace the question mark with the value that I'm returning, which in this case is 2. It just so happens that the return info cell is also specifying line 6. That is why it is confusing. Because when we execute line 6 to resolve the question mark, the statement that is being resolved is also line 6. But don't let that distract you from what a return statement is supposed to do. Okay? Okay, so that means return n times 2 does not execute at this point. I'm just resolving what the question mark is supposed to be, but I'm not returning n times 2 at this point. After line 6, I have to go to the end of the subroutine on line 8. Line 8, once again, is the end of the entire subroutine. We deallocate both of these columns. And then where do we go back to? Well, according to this, we go back to line 6 again. So now we're back to line 6. Once again, line 6 does not look like the pseudocode line 6 anymore because the invocation has now been resolved to a value of 2. In other words, what we are executing on line 6 of row 16 of the trace is returning n times 2, n being column D. Column D has a value of 3 at this point. 3 times 2 gives me a value of 6. So effectively, when I execute line 6 of row 16 of the trace, we're executing return 6. Okay? Now what do I do when I execute a return statement? I copy and paste the return info cell, locate the single question mark, and replace that with the value that I'm returning, which in this case is 6. And that's what we're going to do here. We copy and paste the return info cell, locate the question mark, replace it with the value that I'm returning, and we're done. Once again, I am not printing at this point because all I'm doing when I execute line 6 of the pseudocode of row 16 of the trace is simply to resolve what the question mark is supposed to be, but it is not time yet to actually print anything. Are we doing okay? That's why in this particular class I refer to the row number of the trace and also the line number of the pseudocode, because you need both of those to cross-reference what we are doing in this particular trace. We're done with line 6 at this point because we are just resolving what the question mark is. After line 6, we don't have anything else to do in the conditional statement. We go to line 8. And here's line 8. Line 8 is the end of a subroutine. We deallocate all the columns that we have allocated for this invocation. And then we go back to whatever the return info cell is telling me to return to. In this case, I'm going back to line 9. Okay? Because this is telling me to go back to line 9. And this is exactly what it looks like at this point because the invoke is already resolved. It tells me that the entire invocation of factorial is only giving me a result of a value of 6. So now I'm just printing 6 on the screen. There are no additional invocations to deal with. So on line 9, I'm just printing 6 to the screen or a piece of paper, and then we are done. Are we doing okay so far with this one? Because I know this one is confusing. The confusion comes from the fact that we are resolving a question mark that is on line 6 when we execute line 6. Are we doing okay or? Okay. Because if you guys have any questions, you can ask. Okay, let me just maximize this so we can see the entire trace a little bit better. Are there any questions about this trace? Just tell me which row number you want me to kind of explain again. Okay, let me move this line out of the way because it's there you go. No question? Okay. Well, I'm very hopeful that hopefully my recording is working this time. So, yes, it has to. This class is more important than some of my other classes. Because in this class, I think I did a fairly good job referring to the line numbers and also the row number of the trace, which helps to explain what is